Hi, guys. I'm actually going to go through and practice converting fractions, decimals, and percents with you. If you remember, we've already gone through how to do it with fractions and decimals because we've done our fractions and decimals unit already, right? Now we're just adding in the percent part. So I'm going to start off with, keep in mind, I'm also drawing on my laptop, so my handwriting is going to be kind of poo-poo. Okay. So I'm going to start off with just what does getting started look like? And getting started is just being able to explain what a percent means and knowing that the fraction bar actually means to divide. So if I give you something that looks like this, right? It is 3/5. Yay. We knew that a long time ago, right? We learned our fractions a long time ago. But now you need to also realize that fraction bar means that we can also divide. So what goes in as my divisor or my dividend and what goes on the outside as my divisor? You need to know which number goes inside the box. Okay. So the first number that you read or say is the first number that you're going to write down in your box. Okay. So it's 3 divided by 5. 3 being divided by 5. And by now, we shouldn't be saying anymore. Like kids at the beginning of the year would say, "Oh, you can't do that." Yes, you can. Right? Now we know that you can. You can actually go through and add your decimal points, right? So that way you can actually go through and solve it. So 5 times what will get me 30, right? So then we would know that you can actually go through and get a decimal out of this. So that's the whole reason why you need to know that a fraction bar means to divide in this section, because it's going to help you convert from a fraction to a decimal point, right? Okay. The other thing is just to know that a percent is out of 100. The reason why you need to know this part is because we are going to start converting, and it's going to make things a lot easier. So there's a couple of different scenarios on here that I show you. It all just depends on how your brain works. If this is what you're interested in, this actually tells you in words what to do along with some of your examples, right? And then these are just some that are, I call this kind of your basics. You need to have these memorized. You should be able to know that 1/2 is 50% by now, okay? Or that 25% converts to 25 hundredths or 1/4. Okay. If we don't know these yet, this is something like if you want a starting point on what to memorize, these are the common decimals, percents, fractions, conversions that you're going to do in everyday life. So I threw those on there for you. I do like this guy's kind of creepy, but I like the overall examples that this website gave. So I'm going to start off with here because it talks about your percentages. How do you get from a decimal to a percent, right? And so that's going to be kind of where I think you're going to understand why a getting started scale is that a percent is out of 100. So here we go. All right. So let's say I'm just going to work out some of his examples. So he starts off with giving the example of this decimal. Okay. And if I'm writing them down, lots of kids will say, "Oh, it's 0.7," which is true. We say 0.7 if we're trying to like tell someone how to write it quickly, but to read it correctly in math terms, you read it as the number itself, whatever number you see. So I see the number 7, and then you say the place value underneath it as well. So this is actually 7. So I'm writing my number 7, and then my denominator is the place value that it stops in. So it stops in the tenths spot. Okay, so I said the number 7, and the place value is my denominator. So the reason why you need to know that a percent is out of 100 is because right now, if I'm like, we have a decimal, we have a fraction. What is this as an equivalent percent? Okay. You need to know that in order to turn it into an equivalent percent, you have to get your denominator to turn into 100. So let's do that. We're going to use multiplication to turn our denominator into 100. So 10 times what is going to get us 100? I know 10 times 10 is 100. And if you don't know that, you can use your fact sheet. So 10 times 10 is 100. I also know whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. That's the whole point of it being equivalent, right? So now I have 70 on top, 70 out of 100. So 7/10 is written as 7/10, but it's equivalent to 70 over 100. And the reason why I want to know that is because any number over 100 can also be written in terms of a percent. This is 70%. As soon as you get that number over 100, that is your percent, because percents are out of 100. Okay. So let me go into the next example. So that was this guy right here, if in case you're wondering where I got it. We just converted a decimal to the fraction. And then what did that mean in terms of getting it to a percent? Now let's look at the other one. So the other guy is right here, right? So instead, I'm going to write this. And again, if we were trying to tell each other what to write in math, we might say 0.07, right? Just so we like write it correctly. But when you say it, you want to say it mathematically correct. So this is actually the number 7. And then what place value does it set in? I know this is my 10th spot. So that means it's setting in the hundredths, right? So this is actually read as 7 hundredths. Okay. Again, my handwriting's derpy. I'm sorry, but I'm writing on my little mouse pad or whatever you call that thing, right? Okay. So this is read as 700. So I already have my answer, because any number written over 100, that is my percent. Ta-da! So that's the whole reason you want to know this. Okay. Going back to the top, percent means out of 100. I need to know or explain what a percent means. A percent means out of 100. You want to know that because as soon as you get your fraction over 100, your number over 100, you have found your percent. That's how they all fall together. Okay. So let's go back down real quick. These are your notes on your Canvas page. So I'm just walking you through it. If you start out with a fraction, your whole goal, if you're trying to turn it into a percent, is to get your denominator to turn into an equivalent fraction with 100 on the bottom. Because as soon as you can get that 100 on the bottom, whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top, right? So I had to multiply 25 by 4 to turn it into 100. So I have to do the same thing to the top, and I got 8. As soon as you get a number over 100, you already know you have your percent, okay? So take that fraction, turn it into an equivalent with 100 on the bottom as your denominator, and that's your percent, okay? So that's what those notes mean. Moving on. Here's some other ones. I had 5 as my denominator. And I know if I multiply 5 by 20, I get 100. So I have to multiply 2 by 20 and I get 40. So that automatically becomes my percent. So this would be 40%, right? Okay. This is also saying if I want to take a fraction and turn it into a decimal. How do I do that? Well, we already knew that, or we should already know that, right? To get your fraction into a decimal, all you're doing is dividing, right? So if you notice, I can take 2, right? I have 2/5. This was my original, in case you can't tell. I had 2/5 as my original, right? So in order to turn it from this fraction into a decimal, I need to know that that means divide. That means 2 divided by 5, okay? And we did practice that in our decimal unit of how to do it. So that does turn it into a decimal. If you were like, oh, dear God, don't make me divide again, you don't have to. You can still use this formula up here. So instead, you're starting out with your fraction, right? And you want to turn it into a decimal. So make the fraction say a place value. So I don't have 5 as a place value. I know I have, if I'm like looking in my decimal sections, my first decimal place value is tenths. My second place value is hundredths, right? So here's an example. I took it and I multiplied it by 20 to make it say 100, but I could also multiply it by 10 right? Or sorry, multiply it by 2, and that would get me 10. All right. So that would mean now all of a sudden my denominator is a place value because tenths is a place value. So if I multiply that by 2, I got to do the same thing to the top. So what does my numerator become if I'm multiplying by 2? It became a 4. So now all of a sudden my answer is 4 tenths, right? Okay. Moving on. Oh, so this part right here, how I said, say it, just say it out loud. If you're trying to turn a decimal into a fraction, all you have to do is say it. That's it. So if you read it properly, you are just reading the number. That's the number 38. Okay, I know how to say that. That is your number on top. And then all you have to do after you read your number is say the place value that it ends in. And this number 38 ends in the place value hundredths. So that place value is what is your denominator. Cool. Okay. So if I happen to do I don't know why I keep using 7 as an example because on my mouse pad that's really hard to draw. Okay. So if I wrote this as a decimal that I need to say out loud, don't say 0.07. Say it as like mathematically correct terms. You would say the number 7 and then the place value that it ends in. So it ends in the hundredths place value. So I would read it as 7 hundredths, and that is 7 hundredths as a fraction. So as long as you know how to, if you know your place values, you can read your decimal out correctly out loud. It automatically says what it should be as a fraction. Okay. The only thing that is different is some kids are starting to see this in their problems as well. So you might get something like this. Oh God. How do I even? Sorry, guys. I should have just set the back button. That would have helped. Okay. Still learning the program. Okay. So what if I had 4.01? Okay. How do you actually say that? Well, when you get to your decimal point, we should know by now you say the word and. So this is actually 4 and 1/100th. It's the number 1 and it's sitting in the hundredth spot. So in case you get something where you actually have a whole number and then numbers on the decimal side, that's how you write it, 4 and 100th. Okay. And if you're going from a percent to a decimal, this is your overall rule. Okay. A percent to a decimal is moving your decimal twice to the left. That's your overall, like, if you can memorize that, awesome. Some kids can, some kids can't. I want to explain why though. Okay. So if you have 35%, 35 always, or whatever number you have is out of 100, right? Yeah. We learned that any number, if it's a percent, is out of 100. Well, when I write it like that, that means I'm taking 35 and I'm dividing it by 100. That is why you need to know that this line is a division bar, okay? Because guess what happens when I take 35 and I divide it by 100? That means you are going to end up with moving your decimal twice to the left. That's like the shorthand for it. Okay. If you divide something by 10, you're moving your decimal once. If you divide by 100, you're moving it twice. If you divide by 1,000, you're going to move it 3 times. Okay. Like your cheat method is just knowing how many zeros it has, and that's how many times you pop over your decimal. It's just the way that it works out. So it's kind of a fun, quick way to memorize that rule. But if you can't, then just remember that 35% just means 35 divided by 100. And if you work that out, you will get a decimal answer. So it will give you the decimal answer in case you cannot memorize the moving of the decimal point. Okay. Same thing here. If you're going from a decimal, right, to a percent, it's the same thing as multiplying by 100, right? So when you're multiplying by 100, you're actually moving it twice to the right. It's getting larger. When you're multiplying, things get larger, okay? So that's why. So that is how you can convert between fractions, decimals, percents, and how you can refer back to your notes and what's written in Canvas and in your own math notebooks to help guide you. I hope this helped.